I filmed this video last week, but I didn't really like how it turned out, so here we are again. Hi, my name is Stevia, my pronouns are she, her, and welcome to my channel. I'm happy to have you with me. Hope you guys are feeling okay. It's a really pretty day outside, and I'm ready to talk about some art. You can tell by the title, today we're going to be talking about sad art. I had this conversation with a good friend of mine who's also creative, named Eden. Actually, check out her magazine. I'm gonna put it down below. It's really amazing. But anyways, I had this conversation with her about art making, and it really just like sparked a nerve. So I wanted to talk about it with you guys today. I have some tea with me here. So yeah, let's just talk about art. So if you don't know me, my name is Stevia, and I like to make and talk about art. Also, if you see me looking like away, I have some like notes down, so I'm sorry if I keep looking in another direction. I think that at the beginning of my art making, I couldn't help but lean into this trope or idea of being like a sad artist. Like if you look up sad art into Google, you'll find hundreds and thousands of articles about how sadness and creativity are linked, or how when you're sad, you're most creative, etc., etc. So I think I internalized a lot of those ideas and tropes of being a sad artist. You know, I was actually looking through my art journals that I have here. This is like the first art journal that I really ever made for a program that I did, and then I also got like this art journal. But I was looking through like my entries and I was reading through them, and I just realized how a lot of my creative ideas came from places where I was like deeply traumatized, or I was just really sad. And I was just thinking about like, why do we do this? Why are we so connected to sad art? Why do we always gravitate towards sad art and making sad art? So I wanted to bring you guys along to what I discovered. So I like to assume for the most part that people don't like being sad. We don't like tragedy or feeling lonely, heartbreak, all of these other emotions, so on and so forth. Now, a lot of the art that we consume, especially the ones that we claim are our favorites, hold a lot of these emotions in them. For me personally, one of my favorite films is by Arthur Jaffa called Love is the Message is Death. It's a thought-provoking and beautifully crafted film about African-American identity and experience in the US. It honestly makes me feel a range of emotions, most of them relating to like sadness and like tragedy almost, but I've literally watched it like thousands of times. It's like so beautiful. If you've never seen it, I'll try to find it on YouTube and like link it below. It's literally like, I don't know, 13 minutes or so. My gravitation towards this film is not a coincidence. In the article, The Acknowledgement and Paradox of Tragedy by Natalia Dang and Don Evers, they write that the reason we enjoy sad art is that it acknowledges the tragedies in life, whereas sad events in life are just sad events. I specifically like the quote, "Works of sad art have much in common with monuments to real-life tragedies. The difference is that since sad art typically touches on universal themes, it commemorates not only specific events, but general aspects of life." It makes sense that we're drawn to sad art because sadness and melancholy are beautiful. There's a sort of elegance about consuming sad art that I think many of us seek out. And it's not necessarily about wanting sad events to happen to you or seeking out tragedies in your life, but more about seeking validation for everyday things that just happen to be sad in life. For example, let's talk about one of my favorite albums, which is Blonde by Frank Ocean. I think every person that has come across this album and listened to it probably has fallen in love with it and the message behind the album. And I know personally for me, I could listen to this album for hours and hours and hours and not get tired of it. Even when I'm in a great mood, like I could be so happy and still want to listen to this album. And you know, I could specifically talk about how I felt when I listened to each song for the first time, or analyze the chorus of each song within the album. But obviously, like many Frank Ocean listeners, I listen to the music because of the way it makes me feel. It's a feeling that is really incomparable to many other things that I experience, and yet I somehow relate to it and keep wanting to come back to feel it again and again and again. The sadness of the songs is so beautiful, and it just keeps you wanting more and more and more. You keep hitting the rewind, the rewind, the rewind.
It's too short, babe. It's too short. My finger got numb because I kept hitting replay.
You keep rewinding the song, so listen to it again because you want to feel how you felt when you listen to it for the first time. And I know like I reference film and music, but this is applicable to really any form of art, whether it's dance, illustration, photography. You can get this feeling from many different art forms, and this feeling of sadness that you just want to keep going back to it, even though it reminds you of something that might be negative. As my friend Zanea put it is easy to relate to sadness because life in itself is often very sad. And these negative emotions of sadness and distress, they often linger even during times of happiness. This phenomenon and idea has been ingrained into the minds of many artists. It's not like we lose creativity when we're at bliss or when we feel happy. But it's the notion that we are unable to make art that's going to connect to people unless it comes from a place of deep trauma or emotion, or the art itself is just sad. Oftentimes we credit artists for the most heart-wrenching pieces and deem them to be brilliant artists and prodigies. And I'm not saying that they're not, because oftentimes they are. The issue arises when we only give acclaim to art that exemplifies sadness. Many people, from everyday museum goers to professional art critics, seem to value sad art over art of other emotions because of how raw and real it feels. And maybe this dilemma is more of a reflection of how we're a bit addicted to sadness, but nevertheless, I believe that it's a bit unfair that as artists, we are expected to make art that comes from pain. The idea of turning pain into art glamorizes the trauma and the serious pain that many artists are experiencing and dealing with, all in the name of turning something painful into something beautiful. That pain that took hours for us to deal with and to go through is just going to be plastered on a wall and sold to some rich white guy. And in turn, this notion that artists have to be sad in order to make great artwork can have serious consequences, and this isn't new. Many artists have gone down a rabbit hole of addiction and mental distress. It can seriously tarnish someone's well-being. The art industry is already so cutthroat, and on top of that, having to be in mental distress and still have the expectation of making wonderful and earth-shattering art is just simply unfair and unhealthy. And I'd also like to talk about how identity plays a role into the art industry and this concept of turning pain into artwork. Especially as a Black artist, I feel like sometimes it is expected of us to commodify and simplify our identity and our life experiences and our trauma in order to be taken seriously or looked at like a serious artist, especially when your work is being judged or sold to higher art institutions. I feel like as Black artists, we engage so differently with art spaces as opposed to the way more privileged artists engage in these same spaces. I was assisting for an artist last summer, and he taught me something very crucial that maybe was obvious to like other people, but I hadn't really connected the dots. And it's the fact that predominantly white institutions, whether it's a school or it's a business or it's an art museum, whatever the case may be, they all function in basically the same way. And they are all microcosms of the greater racist and sexist institution that this country was built on. And I think especially now with the hypervisibility of movements like Black Lives Matter, we are starting to see a sort of weird shift and almost appropriation of these movements in art spaces. And it's almost a sort of like trauma porn, honestly, of how much content and pieces are being created from Black trauma and Black pain. And I'm not talking specifically from Black artists, I'm talking even white artists are exploiting Black trauma for their own personal gain. For example, in 2015, white artist Tyrock Moore did a life-size installation of Michael Brown laying face down in the middle of an art gallery with police tape surrounding his body. I'm not going to show the image of the installation because honestly it was a bit triggering and traumatizing to look at, but when I tell y'all that I was so shocked that this actually happened, and on top of that, she got critical acclaim from journals like The New Yorker about her anti-racist art practices and how she's standing up for Black Lives Matter. And later in 2015, she went on to say in her interview by Pelican Bomb, "My art is expensive to make. I'm very far in the hole, and it has gotten to the point that I must start making money to be able to make more art. And this was in response to that same installation, basically admitting to exploiting the death of Michael Brown. And on top of that, it was not even with the consent of his father. It is so disgusting to me how some white artists are so comfortable with exploiting Black trauma. And it isn't just with non-Black artists. I think even Black artists are commodifying Black movements like Black Lives Matter for their own personal gain. And it's very frustrating because it's hard to distinguish whether someone is making this art because they really want to connect and heal the community, or if they're making it in order to appease white audiences. I think that predominantly white institutions, which are usually the richest institutions and the most resource institutions, when interacting with Black artists, it's going to interact in the same way that the larger society interacts with Black people. And that is in our society, and it was like very apparent with summer 2020 of how addicted people are to Black trauma and Black suffering and Black pain. And so of course white art institutions are going to act in the same way, and they're going to want to take in art that exemplifies the sadness and tragedy of being Black sometimes. And I think it's really sick of how comfortable some of these art institutions are with basically exploiting Black artists and their pain and trauma. And I think a lot of Black artists, those who really make their artwork for the Black community, or they make their artwork for themselves to heal themselves, it can be really difficult having to balance the systems that we're put in. I think it's a bit unfair that we have to be more conscious of the way that we interact with these white art spaces, especially when not everyone's going to be understanding of our experience and our trauma. Not every person who looks at our pieces is going to agree with what we're saying, even if what we're saying is valid and true. There's a bunch of different pieces at play when you bring identity into the conversation. And I hope to talk about this a little bit more at another time, because I'm kind of simplifying it right now. But yeah, I just thought that that's a really important piece to bring up when we're talking about sad art and how different marginalized artists are kind of put in a box where that's the only art that is acceptable. So back to the original question, is good art sad art? The answer I've found is not always. Technicalities aside, good art is art that connects to people. It speaks about the realities of our world, whether general or personal, and shows us our culture at any given point in time. Art has the ability to connect and transform the lives of millions of people across the globe. Sometimes art has to do with loss, hurt, anger, frustration. Sometimes it has to do with love, happiness, self-growth, bliss. Sometimes it has all of these emotions or none of them. Good art can exist in a multitude of ways. As art consumers, we should learn to put as much value in non-sad art that we do in sad art. This is obviously much easier said than done because I think it is easier to relate to sadness and to be sad than it is to relate to something happy. And as a person and artist, I obviously go through the same things, but I've made it a goal with myself to be more vulnerable with my art making. Usually we use the word vulnerable when relating to sadness or emotional distress, and obviously we should continue to keep being vulnerable in that sense. But I've learned that I personally am more comfortable in sadness than I am in happiness, probably because it takes more energy out of me to be happy than it does to be sad. And that correlates to my art making and my creative process. Art making isn't any one thing. You should make what you want to make. And obviously I'm gonna have moments where I'm sad and I'm gonna want to create, and everyone has those moments, and it doesn't mean that we should step away from those moments. But there are moments where I feel happy and content with the way my life is going, and I think those moments should be recognized as well.